The air in the courtroom was already thick with anticipation, but today was different. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the very marble and wood of the chamber knew a verdict was being rendered long before the jury would speak. All eyes were on the prosecution, who stood with an unnerving stillness. They knew this day would be a turning point. But no one in the gallery, not the press, not even Diddy's own stoic legal team, could have prepared for the seismic shift that was about to occur. A hush descended as the lead prosecutor approached the bench. In her hand, she held a small, unassuming digital audio recorder. It looked mundane, but in the context of this room, it felt like a key to a locked room everyone had been whispering about. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the jury, letting the silence marinate before addressing the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution has come into possession of new evidence, acquired through a federally authorized seizure of a hidden server at Mr. Combs's Los Angeles residence. The judge, a man whose face had become a mask of judicial neutrality, leaned in, his interest piqued. The nature of this evidence, counsel? It is a series of encrypted audio files, Your Honor. Specifically, a recorded phone conversation between the defendant, Sean Combs, and Bishop T.D. Jakes, dated August 9, 2022. This was 6 months before the formal federal inquiry was made public. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. T.D. Jakes, the titan of the pulpit, the spiritual counselor to presidents and moguls. His name, spoken in this context, felt like a sacrilege. The judge's face was grim. He gave a single, decisive nod. You may proceed. The courtroom lights were lowered. As the audio file was cued, a profound quiet fell. The first sound was static, then the unmistakable, hushed tones of two men who believed they were speaking in absolute privacy. This was no friendly chat. It was a conversation conducted in the shadows. Diddy, the pressure's building. T. They're getting closer. I need that spiritual cover we talked about. The LA stories are starting to resurface. T.D. Jakes. Peace, Sean. The fortress we built has high walls. They can circle it, but they cannot breach it. Remember the teachings. Keep the circle impenetrable. Diddy, what about the girls? The ones who might talk? T.D. Jakes. The fragile ones always crumble. That is the nature of things. Your only job is to ensure the recordings never see the light of day. They are the only real threat. The rest is just noise. The silence that followed was more damning than the recording itself. Before we unpack the chilling implications of that recording, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to Celeb Spot, and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our coverage as this story continues to unfold. Now, back to the courtroom. The recording continued, each word a hammer blow to Diddy's carefully constructed image. Diddy, the media is asking questions. Even J. Loskamp is making noise again. T.D. Jakes, let them make noise. The truth is a tool, Sean. You give them just enough to change the subject. Create a new storm to distract from the real one. Silence is your sanctuary, my friend. Diddy, and if the victims get louder? T.D. Jakes, then you remind them of the cost of their testimony. Some are destined for the stage, others for the shadows. That is the divine order of things. A sob broke the silence from the back of the courtroom. One juror, a middle-aged woman, brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. T.D. Jakes, the man whose sermons on grace had filled stadiums, was now heard discussing strategy, manipulation, and the divine order of silencing victims. The lights came up. Diddy was a statue, his expression a blank wall. His lawyers stared forward, their faces pale, as if they too were hearing this for the first time. The prosecutor stepped forward again, her voice low but clear. What you have just heard, members of the jury, is not a spiritual consultation. It is a masterclass in obstruction. A conversation between a man accused of systematic abuse and the religious icon who taught him how to frame that abuse as a spiritual trial and its exposure as an attack from the enemy. She let the words hang in the air. The fragile ones always crumble. That's how he referred to the women who came forward. the people whose lives were shattered behind the velvet ropes of his parties. The room was a tomb. This, she concluded, is more than a celebrity scandal. This is a crisis of faith, orchestrated from the very top. The judge, looking exhausted, banged his gavel softly. This court will take a 15-minute recess. But no one moved. A profound stillness had taken hold. The most devastating revelation wasn't that a mogul had secrets, but that a man of God had allegedly helped him craft the locks to keep them hidden. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted from shock to a cold, hard sobriety. The sanctuary had been violated, and the echoes of T.D. Jakes's calculated words lingered like a poison in the air. He wasn't physically present, but his shadow now loomed larger than Diddy himself. The prosecutor returned to the lectern, this time holding a document binder stamped with a federal evidence seal. "Your Honor," she began, her voice unwavering, "we would like to enter the full, verified transcript of the conversation into the record. Furthermore, we wish to present the court with our next exhibit, an internal strategy document from Combs Enterprises, dated just 2 days after this call with Bishop Jakes." The judge gestured for her to proceed. The projector whirred to life, displaying a memo. Subject: Reputational Shielding, the Sanctuary Protocol. Date: August 11, 2022. To Executive Team, Combs Global. From Redacted, Crisis Management. Following consultation with our Divine Counsel, Mr. Combs will adopt a strategy of theological framing. All public-facing messaging will be routed through faith-based channels and allied spiritual leaders. Divine Counsel will provide the necessary scripture to counter any negative narratives. Key themes: forgiveness, spiritual warfare, redemption. A collective gasp swept the room. "Let me direct your attention to the phrases," the prosecutor said, pointing a laser at the screen. Divine Counsel. Theological framing. This document isn't about legal defense. It's a blueprint for spiritual manipulation. It's a plan to use the language of God to shield the actions of a predator. And the terminology mirrors the very advice given by T.D. Jakes on that call. Diddy's lead attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. This is speculative. There is no evidence Bishop Jakes authored or even saw this memo." The prosecutor was ready. "We are not alleging authorship, Your Honor. We are demonstrating a clear and undeniable pattern of influence. The strategy described in this memo is a direct operationalization of the tactics discussed on the call. This is about establishing a chain of command, from the pulpit to the press release." The judge considered it for a moment. "Objection overruled. The jury will consider this as evidence of influence, not direct action." The prosecutor advanced to the next slide. This time, it was a scanned image of a handwritten note, found in the planner of Diddy's personal assistant. The scrawl was rushed, urgent. "Call TJ. Needs scripture for loyalty, containment. Public needs to see this as a test of faith." The connection was no longer a theory. It was a receipt. In the gallery, Cassie Ventura's legal representative watched, her expression unreadable but intense. The puzzle of how Diddy had maintained his power for so long was finally being assembled, and a key piece was a man in a clerical collar. The prosecutor addressed the jury directly. "You've heard the call. You've read the strategy. You've seen the direct request for scripture for containment. This was a system. A machine designed to insulate a powerful man, not with money or lawyers alone, but with the armor of God Himself. It was designed to make victims question their own truth, to make them feel as if speaking out was an act against faith." For the first time, a crack appeared in Diddy's stoic facade. He leaned over, whispering frantically to his lawyer, who began shuffling through his notes with a new sense of panic. The fire had breached the walls, and the architect of his spiritual fortress was now the one pouring gasoline on the flames. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "The court acknowledges the Sanctuary Protocol memo and the assistant's notes as corroborating evidence. This will be considered in relation to the existing charges of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice." As the court recessed for the day, the silence was different. It wasn't shock. It was a shared, somber understanding. Faith itself had been entered into evidence, not as a source of comfort, but as a weapon of concealment. The trial continued, but the weight in the courtroom had shifted from legal arguments to moral reckoning. The prosecution had laid the groundwork, and now they were building their case, brick by damning brick. What came next would connect the private phone calls to the public stage, revealing a pattern so coordinated it defied coincidence. The prosecutor stood before a large screen. Your Honor, the prosecution will now demonstrate a clear pattern of public messaging. We have cross-referenced Bishop T.D. Jakes's most prominent sermons and public statements with the timeline of Mr. Combs's legal crises. 2 columns appeared on the screen. Column A, Diddy Legal Crises, 2018 to 2022. June 2018, assault allegations surface from New York party. November 2019, leaked security footage raises questions. March 2022, whistleblower reports filed with federal authorities. Column B, T.D. Jakes sermon titles, within 72 hours of events in Column A. A storm cannot sink a ship God has anointed. The loyalty of the chosen, guarding your brother's gate. Discernment, when the enemy sends a distraction. The courtroom was breathless. Let's be very clear, the prosecutor stated, her voice resonating with cold fury. We are not putting faith on trial. We are exposing how faith was co-opted. These sermons were not general guidance. They were targeted, ideological defenses, delivered to millions of followers, designed to preemptively discredit victims and investigators by framing them as enemies and distractions. She clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of a direct message, provided by a verified, anonymous source from within Jakes's inner circle. The message was from a ministry aide to Diddy in October 2022. Ministry aide, the bishop sends his strength. He says to hold fast. This Sunday's word will be a shield for you. The faithful will understand who the real enemy is. Diddy, tell him I feel the prayers. The sanctuary is holding. The room was devastated. The sanctuary wasn't a metaphor for prayer. It was the code for their entire operation. It was an infrastructure of silence, built not just to protect a man, but to sanctify his actions. Your Honor, the prosecutor declared, we request these sermon timelines and communications be entered as evidence of a coordinated campaign to manipulate public perception and intimidate potential witnesses through religious messaging. The judge, his face etched with gravity, looked down at his notes, then back at the prosecutor. The evidence is accepted. And let the record show, he added, his voice low and heavy, that this court has never before seen influence wielded in such a manner. We are not just examining a conspiracy of silence, but a conspiracy of faith. The gavel fell, but the sound was swallowed by the profound, chilling realization that the voice trusted by millions to preach the gospel had, in the shadows, been allegedly scripting a cover-up. The question was no longer if the system was corrupt, but how many people were still praying to the man who helped build it. The following day, the prosecution brought forward its most damning witness yet, not in person, but through a sworn affidavit. The outrage had now chilled into a deep, unsettling disillusionment. Faith, for many in that room, was being systematically dismantled. Your Honor, the prosecutor announced, we present the sworn testimony of a former high-level aide to Bishop T.D. Jakes. His identity is protected for his safety, but his words will paint the final, undeniable picture of this operation. She began to read from the affidavit, her voice steady and clear. From 2017 to 2022, my job was to manage what was called reputational ministry. This meant coordinating Bishop Jakes's messaging with the needs of high-profile partners, Mr. Combs being the most frequent. His team would send us crisis briefs. We were instructed to find scripture that could be tailored to themes of loyalty, persecution, and silence. The prosecutor looked up at the jury. He wasn't a pastor in these moments. He was a script doctor. She continued reading. Entire sermon series were designed around Diddy's legal battles. When a new allegation was about to break, the bishop would be briefed. He would then preach about spiritual warfare, or the test of brotherhood. The timing was no accident. It was a 72-hour cycle, headline, then sermon. The goal was to inoculate his followers against the truth. The screen behind her lit up with a document from the affidavit, an internal list titled Emergency Alignment Protocols. Step 1. Identify the source of the spiritual attack, the victim/whistleblower. Step 2. Engage divine counsel, call Jakes. Step 3. Deploy the theological shield, shape the sermon. Step 4. Remind the flock of the mission, frame Diddy's work as divine. Step 5. Neutralize the narrative, silence the accuser with spiritual language. The judge sat back, his expression one of profound disturbance. The prosecutor read one final, chilling line from the affidavit. I once heard Bishop Jakes tell his inner circle after a call with Diddy, "We are not covering a sin, we are protecting a calling." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about God. It was about power. She placed the affidavit down softly. This was the machine. Not just what Sean Combs did, but how he was able to keep doing it. Because his most powerful defender wasn't a lawyer in a courtroom, but a bishop in a pulpit. The session adjourned in a haze of quiet grief. The sacred had been made profane. The divine had been used as a disguise. And behind that disguise stood two men, one with a microphone and one with a cross, who had allegedly built a kingdom of silence on a foundation of Scripture. The final day of testimony arrived under a gray, overcast sky, the weather a perfect mirror for the mood inside the courthouse. The spectacle was over. This was the reckoning. The prosecutor stood for her closing argument, no evidence in her hands, no screens behind her. There was nothing left to reveal, only a truth to be summarized. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice resonating with the weight of the entire trial. "We began this journey to determine the guilt or innocence of one man, Sean Combs. But what we discovered was far bigger than that. We discovered the anatomy of a conspiracy. An empire of abuse, protected by an unholy alliance." She walked slowly towards the jury box. For years, the world asked, how did he get away with it? Today, we have the answer. He had help. Help from the one place no one dared to look. Help from the pulpit. T.D. Jakes was not on trial here, she continued, but his actions were laid bare. In his own words, on secret recordings, he wasn't a counselor, he was a strategist. He wasn't a shepherd, he was a shield. He provided the theological framing to rebrand victims as the fragile ones and whistleblowers as the enemy. Her voice rose with conviction. This was not a moral lapse. It was a calculated, coordinated effort to use the power of faith as a weapon of mass distraction. To offer grace not to the wounded, but to the one who wielded the knife. To turn prayer into a PR strategy and the church into a bunker for a predator. She turned to face Diddy, who sat motionless, a hollowed-out man whose kingdom had crumbled around him. Sean Combs built a world of soundproof rooms and silent victims. But he made one critical error. He believed his fortress of faith was impenetrable. He never imagined that the truth would find a way out. But it did. Through the bravery of those who spoke up. Through a forgotten tape on a hidden server. Through the conscience of a man who could no longer mistake complicity for loyalty. He didn't fall because of hate, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He fell because, for the first time, he was truly seen. And once the world saw the man who helped him build his sanctuary of silence, the illusion was shattered forever. She returned to her table. The prosecution rests. A profound silence filled the room. The trial was over, but the damage was immeasurable. Trust had been broken on a scale far beyond one man's crimes. Power, wealth, and influence had been dissected on a cold, sterile table, but it was faith that lay wounded. As the attendees filed out of the courtroom, they weren't just leaving a legal proceeding. They were walking away from the ruins of an idea, the idea that some voices are beyond reproach. In the end, the The most shocking testimony hadn't come from a victim, but from a man of God, whose voice, once a symbol of hope, was now the undeniable echo of a conspiracy.